Syracuse football has to pursue Purdue tight end Tayvion Galloway in the transfer portal because if they can get Tayvion Galloway, it might just be a 2-for-1.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here in the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, on today's show, we are talking about a big-time transfer portal target for Syracuse football, and if they can get them, it could just be a 2-for-1. That's coming up here on today's show, and if they can get both of these players, we are going to also talk about what the tight end room would look like and the cornerback room. But before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, a possible 2-for-1 special. How do you all feel about it? Well, I'm going to explain it to you throughout this entire podcast, okay? First and foremost, it is early National Signing Day. So between now and Friday, high school football players from around the country can sign their national letters of intent to play for their respective schools. So that's why I'm releasing this podcast early in the morning, because if there's big breaking news with Syracuse football, if they can land someone massive or something completely unexpected happens, guess what? Locked On Syracuse is the place where you're going to need to be. So I have to record this podcast a little early, especially because one of the prospects who we need to keep an eye on relates to this podcast, okay? But let's talk about a transfer portal target. And I promise this is going to also relate to signing day, which I just said, all right? Tayvion Galloway from Purdue. He was a 4-star true freshman tight end last season. He's 6'5", 235, and currently a 3-star transfer. So he's a 3-star transfer at tight end. Is it the biggest position of need? Not necessarily. We talked about it on the transfer portal needs, but they need to pursue this guy. Trust me. For what it's worth, Syracuse football, according to multiple sources, including 24/7 Sports' Mike McAllister. I believe you can trust him. We've had him on the show before. He usually is very right with his information. So when he says something, we should listen. Mike McAllister reported that Tayvion Galloway has been contacted by Syracuse. Now, contact can mean anything. It could just mean, hey, hello, how you doing? It could be, hey, we're really interested in you, or hey, we're not interested in you. But usually it's a good sign when a school contacts a player. It usually means that said school is interested in said player. And Syracuse actually pursued Tayvion Galloway in the 2024 recruiting cycle before ultimately going to Purdue. Now, his scouting report on 24/7 Sports, he's versatile. He can line up anywhere on the field, and he's pretty athletic. And this is something that I'm pretty encouraged by. His high school comparison, I know I'm saying high school a lot, his high school comparison, because he didn't play last season. He was a true freshman. I believe he redshirted. His high school comp, though, was Peyton Hendershot, a productive tight end at Indiana, who's now going on his 3rd season in the NFL. So if you can get someone who turns into him, I think we'd all be pretty happy. Now let's really get to the crux of the episode. Why do we get Tayvion Galloway? Why should Syracuse football pursue him? Not the biggest position of need, right? Is he the most elite transfer in the world? No, he's okay. He's a 3-star transfer, but you could be getting a 2-for-1. That's honestly the biggest reason why you would pursue Tayvion Galloway. His younger brother is a 2025 4-star cornerback recruit, and that is Dawayne Galloway. We talked about him a little bit yesterday on a mini podcast, going over some guys you got to look for on signing day. Dawayne Galloway, and hence why I'm releasing this today. We don't know when Dawayne Galloway is going to be signing his national letter of intent, but just in case it's within the next few hours or the next few days, I wanted to make sure to get this podcast up as soon as possible. I don't have sourcing on this. Okay? I don't. I just want to come out and say it. I'm not reporting it. I'm going to make an educated guess. I'm going to tell you why I'm making an educated guess on this. I believe that if you get one, you are going to get the other. Here's why. We know where Tayvion Galloway played at school last season, right? I've said it already. He played at Purdue. Well, Dawayne Galloway was committed to Purdue, but I believe he decommitted in October, and I can't blame him because Purdue was an absolute mess. I believe their team went 1-11. They just fired their head coach. They're a disaster of a program. They're where Syracuse was in 2020. That is a disaster. You don't want to go anywhere near Purdue. So both of them are gone. But Dawayne Galloway was originally committed to Purdue, so it felt like he's following his brother. That's why I'm making an educated guess, not a report, an educated guess that wherever Tayvion Galloway goes is where Dawayne Galloway goes. And Dawayne Galloway is a 4-star corner. He is a blue chipper. This is massive because if you're Syracuse, you can get both of them potentially. It's a 2-for-1 special. Why wouldn't you want to pursue Tayvion Galloway in the transfer portal when he could be a pretty good player in his own right? But if you get him, you could be getting a 4-star corner on top of it. Does that sound pretty appealing? Let me know in the comment section below because I think so. And they've reached out to him. So it's a good thing that I think Fran Brown and company have the same thinking I do. When he entered the transfer portal, you pursued him last year. That was more under Dino Babers. You didn't get him. He went to Purdue. He's in the transfer portal. Why not go get him now and potentially go get his brother on top of it? The Galloway Brothers 2-for-1 special. And we're going to go more in depth about the tight end room and the cornerback room with these two players. We're going to go more in depth with it in the coming segments. But I mentioned in the transfer portal needs episode, in case you missed it, you can go back and watch it when you're done with this podcast. But in case you missed it, I mentioned that starting corner and tight end are possible needs for Syracuse. I wouldn't say they are the biggest needs, but they could certainly add. They could certainly add at those positions, and you're not going to turn down elite talent, are you? You don't turn down elite talent no matter what position it is. Even in the positions that I said in that episode where I was like, hey, you can set it and forget it. If an elite player says, I only want to play for you, you take them and say, okay, we'll figure out a spot for you. But they are kind of needs. They do kind of need a tight end. They do kind of need a corner. So why not the Galloway brothers? Thank goodness that Syracuse football seems to have the same thinking. They've contacted Tayvion Galloway, according to multiple sources. They were in Dawayne Galloway's, I believe, final 12 before he committed to Purdue, but decommitted. I saw a report out there from a while ago that said Kentucky might be the favorite for him, but that was a long time ago, so we'll see if that's really true. And I'm also, again, releasing this podcast early in the morning because I don't know when Dawayne Galloway is going to commit. I don't. He could possibly be waiting for his brother. And if he's waiting for his brother to make a decision, he can't make a decision himself until the next signing period, which is all the way in February. Because you only have a few days in the early signing period. The next signing period is all the way in February. The transfer portal doesn't officially open until December 9th. So you're not going to be able to make a decision until December 9th. However, I suspect that if Dawayne Galloway announces today that he's signing with X school, then we know where Tayvion Galloway is going to go. Again, I'm making an educated guess. But the fact that they were both going to Purdue, one was already at Purdue and the other was coming, they both drop out, it leads me to believe that you're getting both. And for Syracuse, I think it makes perfect sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Can Syracuse football land a potential 2-for-1? Because it would be terrific. Now, coming up, let's say that Syracuse football does land the 2-for-1. They do it. Yes, let's go, right? What the tight end room look like? And then later on, we'll talk about what the cornerback room would look like. That's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. Hate the team you drafted in season-long fantasy, but want to stay in the action? Introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent, and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy movement at Better Together. Better Together is the first cooperative daily fantasy application. Better Together provides a sense of camaraderie and enhances the social experience of watching sports. And it makes you realize that daily fantasy is fun alone, but like a lot of other things, it's better with friends. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign up using promo code Locked On for a chance to play in a contest with or against me, because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. Let's say Syracuse football does it. Fran Brown strikes again in the transfer portal and high school recruiting. He gets the Galloway brothers. Woohoo! Go Syracuse. The next two segments, we are going to talk about what the tight end room looks like and what the cornerback room looks like with the Galloway brothers. We're going to start with the transfer portal target, and that is Tayvion Galloway, and what the tight end room will look like. With or without Oronde Gadsden, I think it's a solid move. And obviously, if Oronde Gadsden decides to go pro, and I think it's likely he does go pro, I believe he was just named first team All ACC. He's probably going pro, but with or without him, I think this is still a very solid move that Syracuse football should make. With Oronde Gadsden would obviously be the number one tight end for next season. I think we could just set it and forget it. Then you also have Jamie Tremble, a 2024 four-star tight end. He's more of a receiving tight end that definitely needs to put on weight. That's part of the reason why you didn't see him on the field all that much last season, aside from the Holy Cross game. But he could be a very good player. This could be Oronde Gadsden 2.0 and Jamie Tremble. And I think it's a perfect compliment that you would be getting a guy like Tayvion Galloway, who's probably a little beefier, could line up on the line more, and still be a productive pass-catching tight end as well. There's nothing wrong with having two very good tight ends on the field. That also leaves Dan Villari. With Oronde Gadsden especially, and I don't think he's going to come back, but we have to analyze both scenarios here. I think it gets really tricky for a guy like Dan Villari because, again, I don't have sourcing, but I'm just talking hypothetically. I look at the roster and what happens if this move happens. He could be a potential transfer out candidate. It's possible because I just mentioned Oronde Gadsden would be the starter. You want to keep Jamie Tremble, a four-star tight end from last season, at all costs. You really want to keep him, and you're getting Tayvion Galloway. So is Dan Villari going to be the fourth tight end? Is he going to be okay with that? I'm not entirely sure. And I like Dan Villari. I think he was a pretty good backup tight end for us this season. And he was really good down the stretch in 2023 when he was called upon in a bigger role. But with a guy like Tayvion Galloway, it gets very tricky. So that's why I say he could be a transfer out candidate. And honestly, Tayvion Galloway, I'm sure, did not enter the transfer portal to be a depth tight end. Like, I just don't see it. So would he accept being a fourth tight end in Syracuse or even a third tight end? I'm not entirely sure, which means what happens to Dan Villari? I don't know. I think it's still a good move to make because you can obviously get his brother as well with Oronde Gadsden. But this move definitely makes a lot more sense, assuming Oronde Gadsden goes pro. It makes a lot more sense in this case because your top two tight ends for next season would be Jamie Tremble and Tayvion Galloway. Your third tight end is still probably Dan Villari. And again, it goes back to the question of, would Dan Villari be okay being the third tight end? Would Tayvion Galloway be okay coming to Syracuse as the third tight end? This was a four-star prospect as well in 2024. He wasn't as highly rated as Jamie Tremble, but he's still a four-star guy. I'm sure that he's entering the transfer portal right now and he's not thinking, I want to be a third-string tight end at a Power 4 school. He could have done that at Purdue. Would he accept being the second string? The fact that he would have a different role? Maybe. That's more plausible. It makes more sense if Oronde Gadsden's not there, even though it would still be a good move anyway because you can get the corner with him there. But if we're talking the 2-for-1, it's more likely that this move would happen, assuming Oronde Gadsden goes pro. And again, it would make Dan Villari a transfer out candidate. Don't have sourcing on it. Don't quote me on it. Don't say that Jackson Holzer is saying that Dan Villari is going to transfer. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just looking objectively at the depth chart. That's all I'm doing. And I'm trying to use a little bit of common sense, a little bit of logic of why a player would want to enter the transfer portal. And I don't think it would be to be a third string tight end. And if you're Dan Villari, who was just the second string tight end behind Oronde Gadsden, why would you want to come back to Syracuse in a lesser role? It just wouldn't make sense. I would happily take him back. But he certainly would be a transfer out candidate. So the tight end room with Tayvion Galloway, if Oronde Gadsden's still here, which is unlikely, but it would still be OG is the number one tight end, Jamie Tremble and Tayvion Galloway is the 2-3, and Dan Villari is the 4. Assuming that Oronde Gadsden goes pro, Jamie Tremble and Tayvion Galloway are the 1-2 tight ends, and then Dan Villari is probably the third tight end, which would certainly make him a transfer out candidate. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. What do you think of those hypothetical tight end rooms? Obviously, if Oronde Gadsden's still here, no matter what happens, we all win. But I think he's going pro. Still, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below on this hypothetical tight end room. Now, coming up, we are going to talk about the cornerback room if they can get Tayvion's brother, Dawayne Galloway. That's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Syracuse football's regular season over-under for this season was 7.5 wins. Congratulations to those who bet the over. They finished the regular season at 9-3. What a first-year season under Fran Brown. Syracuse will now try for its 10th win in the bowl game, which has not been announced yet. But when it's announced, I will certainly let you know those FanDuel odds. To get in on the action, just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, and never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Once again, this is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we are talking about a potential 2-for-1 special, getting a Purdue tight end from the transfer portal, Tayvion Galloway, and also potentially getting his younger brother, Dawayne Galloway, a 2025 four-star cornerback. We just talked about the hypothetical tight end room. Now let's get into the hypothetical cornerback room, assuming that, hey, Syracuse football does it. They pull off the 2-for-1 special, all right? So what would the cornerback room look like with Dawayne Galloway? Now, the good news with this hypothetical segment is that there's no like Oronde Gadsden here. There's no someone who we're looking at and we're saying, hey, is he going to go pro or not? Now, sure, obviously someone on the team could enter the transfer portal at any moment. And when I'm recording this right now, which is the day prior, everything could have changed. I don't think so, but everything could have changed. And I might have to completely scrap this entire episode, but there's a little bit more certainty right now with the cornerback room and how it looks like going into next season, okay? And once again, the early signing period is today. It runs until Friday. If Dawayne Galloway doesn't sign in this period, we'll have to wait till February. Cornerback room. Clarence Lewis, Notre Dame transfer this offseason. All ACC. Congratulations to him, by the way, all ACC. He's out of eligibility. So he will not be back with Syracuse or in college football next season. That stinks. We obviously would have loved to have Clarence Lewis back. It sucks. But you know what? Best of luck to him. He really maximized his time at Syracuse. And I'm not saying that sarcastically. He had a very, very good season as a starting corner, making all conference. Congratulations to Clarence Lewis. But he's out. He's out the door. He's not going to be on the team in 2025. So how does the cornerback room look? You got Marcellus Barnes. Marcellus Barnes was a 4-star true freshman last season. He played in 5 games. He was limited with injuries. He got hurt in the Stanford game very early, and then he did not play after the Virginia Tech game, I want to say. He started some games, and when you look at the roster outlook for next season, Marcellus Barnes projects to be the starting corner, the number 1 starting corner on this team. I think it's a pretty safe assumption to make. He was a blue chip prospect. He played in games last season. He started games last season. Assuming he doesn't enter the portal himself, he's the number 1 corner for Syracuse this season. You also got Jaden Bellamy, who's going to be a redshirt junior next season. I think for now, this is why I said on the podcast when we talked about transfer portal targets and or transfer portal needs, I should say, that they kind of need a corner. Kind of. But Jaden Bellamy, in my opinion, is fine as a current placeholder as the number 2 corner. I think you got to focus on other things in the transfer portal before you look at corner. That's just my opinion on it. You could upgrade Jaden Bellamy, but for now, I'm fine penciling him as the December 3rd or 4th early number 2 corner for Syracuse. I'm fine doing it for now. Then you got Davion Kerr. He's a true freshman from this past season. He had an interception against Cal, which was pretty nice. He played in 7 games, and he is definitely someone that wildly outperformed his expectations. Not only is he a true freshman, or was a true freshman, I should say, he was rated on one recruiting service. One major recruiting service had Davion Kerr rated. It was Rivals, and guess what star they gave him? You're probably guessing a 3-star. It was not a 3-star. Was it a 4-star? No, it was not a 5-star either. If you're a 4 or 5-star, you're going to be on every recruiting service. No, he was a 2-star. A 2-star cornerback played in 7 games for Syracuse football as a true freshman. That's Davion Kerr. So maybe there's a lot of upside with him that they didn't see in high school, or at least most of scouts didn't see in high school. He played in 7 games. I think it's tough to pencil him in as a starter, but he could be a solid depth corner for your team going forward. I think that's certainly possible. 2-star corner. Played 7 games on a 9-win team. That's pretty impressive. So there are other corners. And I mentioned those 3, though, because once you get to Davion Kerr, I think that's when you could slide in Dawayne Galloway. I think at minimum, he would be the 4th corner for next season. At minimum. And in my opinion, he'd probably be the other starting corner come opening day against Tennessee. Probably. Here's why I think this. Because Syracuse football last offseason, I talked about Marcellus Barnes. Just talked about him even on this podcast, right? Blue chip, 4-star corner from high school, true freshman. He battled in fall camp. And at the end of fall camp, it was him and Devin Grant as the number 2 corner behind Clarence Lewis. And eventually, Marcellus Barnes took over the role and Devin Grant was moved back to safety. I could kind of see that happening with a guy like Dawayne Galloway, who, if he shows up and has a big-time camp, which, based on where he ranks in recruiting, he should be pretty good. Keyword is should. He probably will end up winning the job as the number 2 corner. Fran Brown is not afraid to play true freshman. He's not. He did it with Marcellus Barnes. Why can't he do that with Dawayne Galloway? So if you're Syracuse, part of the reason why you want to get his brother, Tayvion Galloway, is because if you get Dawayne Galloway as well, the 2-for-1, that could be a starting corner for your team next season and for the seasons beyond that. That's what could happen. So I think it's very important overall. The overall theme of the episode is this. In the transfer portal, Syracuse football must pursue Tayvion Galloway, the tight end from Purdue. It kind of fills a need at tight end, and it will certainly potentially fill a need at corner. A young blue chip corner, a 4-star guy in 2025 in Dawayne Galloway. Those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below on the potential 2-for-1 special. As far as what is coming up on the podcast going forward, I have been uploading a ton of podcasts because it is a very busy time of the year. Very, very busy. So today, signing day reactions. It's just general when I'm saying this. Signing day reactions. If anything major happens or anything unexpected happens, then I will upload either a mini podcast or even a full podcast. Anything major, anything completely unexpected. Other than that, there probably won't be too much signing day reaction content. Okay? But I just wanted to let you all know that because it could get pretty hectic if it is pretty hectic. Also coming up on the podcast, we've kind of talked about it a little. It's kind of the elephant in the room. And I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room, you may ask? What's going on with quarterback in 2025? Who's it going to be? So I want to say that a full podcast for it will be done on Thursday, where we will first go into the full quarterback options. We're not necessarily going to name names on this podcast unless you're an in-house guy. But the way I see it is this. We're going to have one segment where we talk about going in-house and the pros and cons of it. And then the next segment, we'll do a 1-year transfer and we'll go over the pros and cons of that. And the third segment, 2+ year transfer, pros and cons of it. So it's more general in terms of what we should be looking for from the quarterback position this offseason. But we're not going to name names. I think the names for quarterback, we could certainly do a ton of episodes on it in the coming days and the weeks because I'm already seeing guys out there who I like. But who knows what's going to happen in a week or two when even more players start hitting the portal and even more quarterbacks start hitting the portal. So that's what's coming up on the Locked On Syracuse podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Donald and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real, and they bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. You can find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. Trust me, you're going to want to hit that bell button because if something major happens in signing day, you can count on Locked On Syracuse. You can count on myself, Jackson Holzer, to upload a podcast for you all. So thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. And hopefully I will see you all today with some big time news.